And I want to talk a little bit about a bill we should pass this week. I believe we will pass this week for the 59th straight year. There are very few things that we authorize every year. Frankly, there are very few things we need to authorize every year. But the authorizing bill in defense is the opportunity for the country and for the Congress to look at what we need to do now that's more appropriate than what we needed to do a year ago to defend the country. Certainly the men and women who serve in the military do that job in a selfless level, and they deserve the best we can do to be sure that they're never involved, Mr. President, in a fair fight. We want to be sure that they're always involved in a fight where they have every possible advantage. They put their lives on the line to keep us safe, and it's up to us to be sure that they have the equipment, the training, the authorization that they need, and the authorities they need to carry out their work. So every year about this time, we move toward the authorizing of what the Congress thinks the military needs. Now, that's followed later by an appropriations bill that is directed in substantial ways by what this bill says should happen. And in fact, the only thing the appropriations bill normally does is determine if it can all be funded and in what segments it's to be funded. We're debating this bill. I hope that both chambers of the House and the Senate can pass this authorization bill as we move on to our next step in this process of defending the country. You know, I think you can argue about almost anything else the federal government does, but the number one priority of the federal government is to defend the country. The number one thing we clearly cannot do by ourselves is that. The number one thing that state and local government can be a partner in on some occasions, but not their responsibility, or nor do they have the capacity to do what we need to do to defend the country. And so we're here to take this important step in that. This version, the Senate's version for this year, authorizes $750 billion to support the Department of Defense and the nuclear and other defense responsibilities of the Department of Energy. Our adversaries are clearly increasing their military capabilities and their military commitments, and we need to be prepared to do just the same. The burden of defending the country is an important one, and frankly, Mr. President, it falls on a very small percentage of our population. About 0.5% of the American people serve in the military. We owe an obligation to those that 0.5% to do our best for them. This bill supports an across-the-board pay increase of 3.1%, a little more than inflation. It's the largest increase in nearly a decade at a time when the people who serve see challenges in more areas than we have seen in a while, and coming from different directions than we've seen for a while. This bill reforms military housing. You know, the strength of the military, leader after leader in the military will tell us and makes the point, the strength of the military is military families. So in military housing, particularly the family housing, there was, I think, thought to be a great idea a couple of decades ago to privatize family housing, and for a couple of years it looked like a great idea, but I think it's time we looked again at our housing obligations, how they're being met. We need to look at what we can do to be sure that the spouses of those serving have an opportunity when they're transferred to a new location to be able to get to work as quickly as possible in the field they're prepared to get to work in. In Missouri this year, in January of this year, the first spouse of someone who'd been transferred to our state was sworn in immediately to the bar, so she could immediately begin practicing law. There are probably, like any attorney, some future legal training requirements during the course of following months, but to be able to go to work, whether it's as a medical technician or a doctor or a lawyer or an electrician or a welder. This should be a priority for the country. I asked the Secretary of the Air Force, Heather Wilson, when she testified the last time before our committee, what's the best thing we can do for military families? And I sponsored some legislation a few years ago where military families can move earlier or stay longer if for work and school, that makes a difference to their family. If you need to go 2 months earlier than your serving spouse to get started school year at the right time, if you need to stay 2 months later, up to 6 months of transition time that's available now. And of course, that's beginning to have some impact on people's decision to stay in the military if their family is considered as a priority and flexibility is part of that priority. But when I asked Secretary Wilson, I said, well, you can do two things that we still need some room for improvement in. And one was to be sure you have the best schools possible near those military bases. And two was to be sure that spouses can go to work, and they can go to work if they want to go to work in the area they're trained for. So this actually allows more effort to be made to be sure that we're working with the Council of State Governments on a certification program to where you could move to a state and quickly be doing that. The reciprocal opportunities for that quick transition is important. There are changes that support families in this bill that have special needs, that support how you deal with a child care provider on a military base, things here to enhance suicide prevention and family advocacy programs. These are all critical, not only people serving, but people wanting to continue to serve. As I said before, the military family is one of the nation's greatest assets, and the serving spouse is not the only one serving. The serving spouse is not the only one transferred to a new military location. The serving spouse is not the only one that has to be happy with that commitment to decide that you're going to go ahead and re-enlist, and we need to be aware of that. This legislation supports military construction projects, including the National Guard Readiness Center in Springfield, Missouri, where I live, the vehicle maintenance facility at Whiteman Air Force Base in our state, the C-130 flight simulator facility at Rosecrans in St. Joe are all included in this authorization projects. Projects like these are necessary to ensure that the military is ready to fight and support their needs at home when they're home. America's defense posture includes what's known as the nuclear triad. This means we have 3 ways that we can deliver a nuclear warhead. We hope to never have to have that happen, but if our adversaries have this capacity, our capacity has to exceed their capacity. And this bill ensures that that continues to be the case. The 409th and the 131st Bomb Wings at Whiteman Air Force Base host one of the legs of that triad, and earlier this year the Air Force announced that Missouri will host the B-2's replacement, the principal B-2 location at Whiteman Air Force Base. We'll host the B-21 Raider as it becomes available to replace that plane that has served the country for so long. I'm proud to support what we need to do to make that transition. There are other aircraft we need to be sure have a viable part of the country's future. The NDAA, the bill we're talking about, provides an additional 24 F-18 Super Hornets to the Navy and begins the purchase of 8 F-15s for the Air Force. All those planes are made in St. Louis. Bill also includes critical mission support for the A-10 Warthog, a plane that our colleague, Senator McSally, is pleased to have flown and flown well. And by the way, I had a chance to introduce her the other day, and I almost ran out of first, Mr. President. She was the first woman to fly in combat, the first woman to command a combat unit in combat, 356 combat hours that she herself flew, the first person to graduate of 260 senior military officers, graduating #1 in that advanced training class. But the Missouri National Guard also flies that A-10. I've been with them when they've flying that in Eastern Europe. So that A-10 capacity continues to be critical. This NDAA authorizes missile programs between the U.S. and Israel, where we've actually learned that you can target an incoming missile. Things like the Iron Dome, the Arrow 3, David's Sling have all, unfortunately for Israel, but fortunately for our military capacity, been proven to work against incoming missiles. These programs help Israel defend itself, but they also increase our capability to do what they need to do. And finally, Senator Hawley from Missouri, Senator Manchin from West Virginia, and I have proposed an amendment to the NDAA that makes May 1st Silver Star Service Banner Day. I've been, along with Senator McCaskill, my colleague who just left, doing this annually for some time. We think this would be a great year to make this a permanent recognition of those Silver Star families. I'd like to particularly recognize Diane Lynn Newton, the co-founder of Silver Star Families of America, who passed away earlier this year. She and her husband Steve were really the driving force behind the organization, and they've really helped thousands of veterans who otherwise were getting very little recognition for their Silver Star service. Saddened that her loss. Hopefully one of the things we'll do in this bill to recognize her great commitment is to make that Silver Star Recognition Day an annual event. So there are bipartisan priorities here. There are priorities here that deal with the needs of the military and their families. That pay raise is a significant part of this bill, but being sure that the #1 job of the federal government, defending the country, continues to be recognized as the #1 job, makes this unique annual reauthorization of the defense bill so important, and I look forward to seeing this Congress pass this bill this week in the Senate and hopefully soon after that in both the Senate and the House.